Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Winters. I work with Volusia County Environmental Management. Currently, my position is Protected Species Activity Manager, and I work with all things coastal, including sea turtles, marine mammals, and birds. So I'm going to give you a presentation tonight about our coastal wildlife and our programs that are happening on the east side of the county, which I think is sort of fitting that we're at Lyonia because this is our ancient coast. It's pretty neat to be over here and see all the ancient sand dunes and what they look like now. But again, I'm going to talk about our current coastal wildlife programs and some of the animals that you'll find out there. So I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully everybody can see this. To start out with, Volusia County beaches host a lot of different habitat for a lot of different animals. There are several species of endangered and threatened animals, including, as I mentioned, sea turtles, but also gopher tortoises, shorebirds and seabirds, and even a rare southeastern beach mouse, which can be seen down here in the corner of the screen. Our beach habitat and some of the management activities that we have in place out there. So as you're visiting Volusia County beaches, you'll see cars driving on our beach, which is somewhat rare in the state of Florida. There's only a handful of beaches that allow public vehicles to drive on the sand. And so in order to sort of protect the habitat and let the people also enjoy the beaches with their vehicles, we have something which is called a conservation zone. And it's a line of posts that are set in the sand, and they're designed to help protect the upper beach so that no cars drive into that area. And as you can see in this picture on the left hand, there's a post there, and just to the left of the post is a track in the sand, and that's a sea turtle crawl track. And further up in the dune, you can see something else posted with these small stakes and ribbon back there. Well, this sea turtle had emerged from the ocean and laid her eggs right up there in the dune system. And they're protected because they're inside the conservation zone where no vehicles are going to come in and cause them any harm. So throughout the county, we have different beach management areas. We have public driving areas, but then we also have these other areas that are referred to as natural areas. And on the bottom right of screen shows one of our natural areas and how they're designated with these very large poles and large signs that indicate that no vehicles are allowed into that area. And those areas were determined how to be established and where to be established because basically we have most of our sea turtle nesting activity in those natural areas. So the habitat's a little bit better, and annually, and this program has been in place for a lot of years, and we're still seeing the same trends with the sea turtles coming back into those same areas to nest every year. So just in general, the sandy beaches and dunes, they provide habitat for not only nesting sea turtles, but also for nesting shorebirds and seabirds. And there's other dune dwellers, like I mentioned, the gopher tortoises, the beach mice, and then a plethora of smaller insects and other reptiles and critters that are out there living. The dune system helps provide us strong storm protection. Basically, anytime we've got high waves kicking up with wind and northeasters, and the ocean's coming closer to that area, that's going to give us our first line of protection. And the beach accretes and it erodes naturally. There's a seasonal process to it. And having that buffer out there really does provide all of the homes and the coastal development their first line of protection. And so we like to have our little motto, to play safe, protect wildlife, and respect our beaches while you're out there. The biggest thing that you can do while you're enjoying our beaches is to basically leave them better than the way you found them. A lot of times you'll go out there and you might find some trash that somebody lost to the wind, and you can help out by taking it home or putting it in a can. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about our sea turtle species. The loggerhead sea turtles are our most common species that come here to nest. And here's a few different pictures of different parts of their life cycle. Mostly the nesting activity can be identified in the mornings by the crawl tracks in the sand. And each individual sea turtle species has a different pattern of crawl track. So in the morning, when we go out on the beach, we won't necessarily see the sea turtle there. We'll just see the crawl track. We may see this mound of thrown sand, which indicates that she likely laid eggs and covered them up. Now, sometimes you'll see a crawl track with no mound of sand, and that is what we refer to as a false crawl, meaning that she did not lay eggs and went back into the ocean. And then here is a very cute little loggerhead hatchling. These are only a couple inches big, and there'll be usually about 100 or so that'll come out of each nest. And a lot of people tend to call loggerhead sea turtles, when they see them as babies, leatherbacks, because when they're young, they look like soft, worn brown leather, but they're actually loggerheads that are this brown color. And then as they get bigger, they get a little more tan, and they have very large heads. And that's actually how they get their name, is because they're log-like heads. They're needed to have, these strong jaw muscles so they can crush things. Large crustaceans like this one here has some sort of conch shell that it's crushing to eat. Loggerhead sea turtles are our most common nester, and this graph just sort of shows a trend of nesting over time. It only goes through 2018, but the last couple of years, it's basically in the same track, where we have an upward increase of loggerhead nesting in Volusia County, which is a good thing. And this sort of just shows the statewide trend. There was a period of time where there was a lot of people who were concerned that the nesting numbers were going down for an extended period, but they've sort of turned back around on their own in the mid 2000s, and overall around the state of Florida, loggerheads are a really important species. And actually, in the whole entire world, Florida is now the #1 loggerhead nesting ground, where we used to be beat out by Oman, which is on the other side of the world, but they've had a big decline in their nesting numbers. And this graph just sort of shows you the hot spots around the state for loggerhead nesting. And you'll see Volusia County is up here. We're sort of, medium and cool for our numbers, not as high as some of these hot spots like Brevard County. This is, one of the real epicenters of loggerhead nesting down in the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. So if you want to go for a turtle walk at night, I would suggest going down to Brevard County and doing one of their programs, because chances are very likely that you're going to get to see a turtle nesting. And then moving into the green sea turtles, this is our second most common nester in Volusia County. The green sea turtles are different in size, and you can obviously see their physical characteristics are different. Their heads are much smaller. They actually get their names because of their diet. They are seagrass eaters, and so they don't need the large heads and the large jaws to chew the seagrass. They need a serrated beak, basically, in order to do that. And as hatchlings, you see over here, they're very different in coloration than they are as adults. They're almost solid black on top and white underneath. And that helps them sort of camouflage when they're out in the wild ocean. As a fish or a predator is looking up from above, up from below, they'll see, blend in with the white surface of the water. And their crawl track is very different than the loggerheads. They have more of a symmetrical pattern, and so in the mornings we can really be able to tell easily if they've laid a nest or not. And actually, in this picture over here, you can see how much thrown sand this female turtle left behind on the beach, which this nest looks a lot different than the loggerhead nest. And we like to joke and say that it looks like a bomb went off on the beach because there's so much thrown sand. So sometimes if you're going out to the beach and you're seeing, a very large barrier, it may be because it's a green sea turtle nest, because it's harder to locate and know where those eggs are at. And so we protect a larger area. And then again, just showing a similar graph, this is nesting numbers in Volusia County over time. You can see back in the 80s, we had almost 0 nests by green sea turtles. And then, in more recent years, we've hit a new record high of over 80 green sea turtle nests just in our county alone. And this is trending, definitely what's happening statewide with, numbers going up exponentially. And so the green sea turtles are, really a recovery story where we're thrilled to see all these nesting numbers happening and going so well. And here again is another graph of, sort of how they nest around the state up here in Volusia County. We have a medium amount of nesting. But again, just to our south, Canaveral National Seashore in Brevard County, they get a lot higher numbers of green sea turtle nests. But all of the habitat is important. I shouldn't, leave out Volusia County. And as a whole, we have a lot of good habitat for this wildlife. And then, of course, our third most common species is the leatherback sea turtle, which I mentioned the name leatherback earlier. The leatherbacks get their name because they don't have a hard shell like the loggerheads and the greens. They actually have a carapace that's leathery feeling even as they're adults. And so here's a hatchling and adult. They basically look the same. They don't really change a lot in coloration. They just get bigger. And when they come out of the water to make their nest in the beach, it looks like a tractor came out of the water. This person, is straddling the crawl track, which is usually about 6 feet wide. This stake right here in the picture is a 4-foot long stake. So it just kind of gives you an idea of the size of these turtles, which can get over 1,000 pounds. And, I like to compare them to the size of a queen bed. They're big mamas. But their nesting numbers here are much lower. You can see we get them more in the 10s or less. This year we're already up to 4 leatherback nests, and our record high was 13. So it just kind of shows you that we don't get a lot of leatherback nesting activity, but other parts of Florida do. And overall, the leatherback sea turtles are showing a very drastic increase in nesting in the state of Florida. So that's what that graph is. And you can see here that leatherbacks really primarily nest just in this region of southeast Florida, which is around Jupiter area, where they get the highest percentage of all the leatherbacks in the state. So we're lucky that we get a few, not a lot, but if you ever have the opportunity to see a leatherback, we hear a lot of stories from commercial fishermen going offshore that they saw a big black turtle out there, and they usually will come in this area of Volusia County and they'll hang offshore where they're not necessarily coming into nest, but they're actually foraging out in the open water. It's around the time that the jellyfish are coming in, the cannonball jellyfish, because that's one of their favorite foods. So that's kind of interesting because some of the research and science is showing that Volusia County, offshore area is very important for the leatherbacks in their foraging before they move south to nest. And a couple other species I'll just mention quickly because they do nest in Florida. On the left is the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle, and on the right is the hawksbill sea turtle. They would be rarely seen here in Volusia County, although we have had a few female Kemp's Ridleys that have returned here over the last few years. One in particular has laid up to 5 nests. And we're lucky enough to know this because the Kemp's Ridley are the only sea turtle species that will typically nest during the day. And we've been able to get out there and identify this one specific individual a number of times. But as for hawksbills, there's one nest that was reported back in the 80s that may have been laid in Volusia County. I doubt they genetically confirmed that. But the hawksbills are more likely found down in South Florida along the reef areas. They may nest down in the Keys or somewhere down in South Florida, but more likely around the Caribbean. But if you're, in the water diving at all, you may see them around the reef systems. Yeah.
When the turtles hatch, do they come back to the same beach to nest?
Yep, so there's a lot of research about that, and there is some site fidelity where they do tend to return to the same general area. It's not always specifically to the exact same location where they hatched from, but there's different subpopulations of all of these species of turtles, which is really interesting because they're returning to the same regions of beach where they nested from. But what's also interesting is that some of the turtles that they now track with satellite tags, they'll actually lay clutches of eggs as they're migrating after the end of season or at the start of season. So as they're moving south in Florida, they may lay a nest up by Fernandina Beach, then one in New Smyrna Beach, and then they'll still head south to West Palm Beach. So that region could, be quite large. Okay, now I'm going to go into just in general sea turtle facts. All 7 species of sea turtles worldwide are listed as either endangered or threatened. There's been some status changes in different areas, but overall, there's still, a need to protect sea turtles. And it's because they have a lot of human threats to them, including fishing practices. Of course, in the United States, we have, pretty strict regulations, but as soon as you get into international waters or into other, countries, the fishing regulations can change quite a bit. So even as some of those other countries are improving their regulations, there's still poaching going on, because some of those communities and societies rely on, sea turtles and their natural resources for food in some areas. Marine debris, that's a big problem that is more and more in the public, highlighted in some of the public stuff right now. I feel like people are more cognizant of what's happening with the pollution that we're causing, and particularly, plastic pollution in our water, which is degrading the habitat and some ways indirectly, because turtles can get entangled in plastic things, but they're also ingesting plastic, and that's, leading to their death, which is, a direct impact. For a long time, there's been habitat destruction. So anytime we're building along the coast, we're reducing that nesting habitat, or we're impacting it in a way that, may reduce the ability for them to reproduce. And then, of course, boating collisions is something that we see on a regular basis. Sea turtles are using our waterways, not only in the ocean, but they're also coming in the inland waterways and the intercoastal waterways to forage on seagrass, particularly green sea turtles. You'll find it inshore a lot. Climate change and these things with, some of the research that's happening with, the warming trends is what we're finding out is some of the egg developments are happening quicker than they ever did. And the fitness of the hatchlings that are coming out of the eggs is reduced. So it's just these subtle changes that, are happening. And it's something we all need to kind of be aware of and what we're doing in our choices every day. But I talked about the coastal development, specifically armoring, like shoreline armoring, when we build the seawalls and the rock revetments along the shore. Again, that's reducing their nesting habitat. But then there's something as, as innocent as artificial lighting. You just want to put a light in your house, and you don't realize that can actually affect a sea turtle, because it may deter them from using that beach to nest, because they don't like the bright lights. They like a nice dark silhouetted beach. But of course, they're marine reptiles. They're solitary in nature. They don't typically congregate in large groups. There is one species of turtle that will nest in a large group at one time, but they're not found here in this area. Why are sea turtles important? So there's a few different reasons. They utilize different habitats, and so there's different species that we're finding them in different places. We know about nature's lawnmowers. You hear that term a lot for sea turtles and manatees, because they eat the seagrass, and what that does is basically it cuts it back and it makes it more healthy. It grows back thicker, it grows back fuller. So we need them out there in that environment. The hawksbills are found on the coral reefs, and they're doing the same thing. They're eating some of the corals that are growing out there, and they're, helping build the structure of that reef. And then even for the sand dunes, something as simple as their clutch of eggs that are left in the sand, after those eggs hatch, there's still a lot of nutrients in those eggshells. I mean, we all know you put eggshells on your tomatoes because it makes them grow. So you think about just that, that little bit of process that's helping on a larger scale. When you have hundreds of thousands of sea turtle nests around the state, that's going to help build those sand dunes up. Yeah.
The seagrass, we've heard that the manatees are starving because of that. Is that affecting the turtles too?
It could be. I know there's some research looking into that right now, but I don't think there's been any real direct impacts, as not to the extreme that the manatees are facing, fortunately. But that could be what's next on the horizon. It's kind of sad. Um, but anyways, they're part of the food web, so they're predators and prey interactions. Fortunately, there's not a lot that can get a adult sea turtle, but when they're younger, they're very vulnerable, and there's a lot of different predators that are after them from the minute those eggs are laid until they get big enough to outswim a shark, or even then it's questionable. But basically, they all spend their entire lives in the ocean. Only the females will return to beaches to nest. And here in Volusia County, our nesting season is officially between May 1 and October 31st. So that's typically triggered by the water temperature. Once we get into the mid 70s, then they'll start nesting. And actually this year, they started nesting early because we were at 74 degrees by mid-April. So it's a busy year already. We're up to, I want to say over 25 nests already. Yeah. And so some of the stuff that's happened out there is, there's a lot of volunteers and everybody working together to do a daily sea turtle survey. They start at the crack of dawn, and there's a couple of nonprofit organizations, mostly the Volusia Turtle Patrol, joined, or they covered the north beaches. So everything from Ponce Inlet north. And then on the south end of the county, we have a joined group that's led by a company that we hire, Ecological Associates. We have a field biologist out there along with another nonprofit organization called the Turtle Trackers. And then the county is involved with our habitat conservation program staff by collecting all that data. They report everything that they find out there, including problems, and they send it to the county. We keep track of it, and then we help address the problems that might be out there. And make sure that everybody's following the rules. So the first thing we do is we protect every nest site. There's a very distinct clear barrier around each one of them. So that's just a visual cue for people, not to drive in there, number one, but then just to kind of stay back and leave those areas alone, no digging and that sort of thing. This is an example of what happens with some of that coastal armoring I mentioned. So here are the turtle crawls. They're crawling up, they're hitting that structure, and they're not leaving a mound of sand, which means they're not laying an egg, because they didn't get to that suitable habitat. They're, instinctually, they're looking for a nice, high, dry spot. And down here in New Smyrna, we have a lot of rock revetment, which is even trickier because the turtles, sometimes they crawl over the rocks and they start digging until they hit a rock, and it's kind of discouraging to find these sorts of crawls. Another thing that we deal with out along the coast is recreational equipment and other obstacles that people leave behind. So a lot of this stuff is something that can be taken up and down every day, like some of these tent frames, when you can see the crawl track here, where luckily she came through and it didn't stop her nesting attempt. But here in this picture, it looks like most likely that did stop her nesting attempt. So she came up and she hit this, set of chairs and turned back into the water and gave up. In this case down here, this is a permanent structure, a beach walkover to the beach where the green sea turtle is still there. And unfortunately, she came in, it was probably dark, she couldn't see really well, and she got trapped in the walkover. And so these are the kind of things that we encounter and just try to educate people about, because Volusia County, we do have a ordinance that prohibits you from leaving recreational equipment on the beach during the nesting season. And so in the morning, we may go out and we'll tag this sort of stuff to advise people to take it off the beach, because we don't want that to happen. But there's a lot of things that Mother Nature throws at us that we can't really prevent. And so we have some predation going on. This is a picture of a foxtail that somebody caught the fox in the nest area before it was even marked. So like I said, from the minute those eggs are laid, they're vulnerable to something out there. In this case, the nest had been established for a while, but something sniffed it out and they went in and they tore up the eggs before they were able to hatch. So one of the things the county has in place is that we don't allow dogs on the beach unless they're a service animal, of course, and then they have to be, under control. But not all people follow the rules. We just had an instance last week where there was an emerging female early in the morning coming out to lay her eggs, and she was scared back into the water by a couple of dogs that I guess people that live down there had just let them, go run on the beach, and they scared the turtle back in the water. So we really encourage people to, understand why it's important that you, follow some of the regulations. And then nest screening and caging, you may see more likely this scenario down here where there's a screen on the sand. And we'll do that as one of the efforts to prevent animals from digging into a nest area. So in some areas, we know that there's a predator problem. We know where some of the coyotes live and the raccoons and that sort of thing. So this is one of the efforts that we'll do to try to protect a nest. So this is a screen and this is a cage. Cages are more rare and they're harder to do because if you cage a nest, then you have to basically babysit the nest. They only cage the nest when it's really close to its hatching period. And so we know basically how long it'll take for a nest to hatch from the day it was laid, till it hatches is usually 46 plus days. And so if we cage a nest, we have to go out there and watch it every night throughout the night. So this is not something that's done frequently because it's so labor intensive. But some other parts of Florida, they do that more frequently.
With the wire grate over it, do they just come out?
Oh yeah, so that's a good question. So this screen on the sand, it is designed, these are, I want to say about 3 to 4 inches wide. And so if that nest hatches, the hatchlings do have space to emerge through the screen. The chances of them getting stuck are much lower than the chances of them getting predated. And usually the screens, we cover them up with sand. In this case, it looks like maybe some of the sand blew off, so it was a good, example picture. And in this case, unfortunately, sometimes when those storms kick up later on in the season, we'll start to have nests actually wash out. And that means that the sand around them is being lost. And so this is a great example of, that clutch of eggs that she buried well underneath the surface, camouflaged it, and unfortunately a storm came through later and washed some of the eggs out. Another situation that we might encounter is something called tidal inundation. And so this is a little bit different where now this nest, we didn't lose any sand on top of the eggs, but the water has come up higher than it did when the nest was laid. And so now it's underwater. And those eggs can't survive. They're going to drown because they need, a gas air exchange to develop. So, again, these volunteers are out here every day and they're looking and they're seeing what's going on. To make sure those nests are doing well, if at all possible. And this is a perfect example of what we like to see. This is a hatchling emergence. So here's the backside of the nest, and you can see all these little tracks that went out straight to the water, and it was successful. And there's a great little picture of a hatchling down there. So it's kind of rare to see a hatchling in the morning because, again, most of the sea turtle activity is happening at night. And they're triggered to come out of their nest not only after they're fully developed, but also by the drop in temperature. So it's usually after dark. Sometimes on a rainy day, a long stormy rainy day, we might have nests emerge during the day, but it's not likely. There's other things that can happen during the day, like red ants might get into a nest, or ghost crabs will get in and they'll aggravate the hatchlings where they might emerge, but that's not typical. Here's a different scenario where we have a nest down here, and you can see all these hatchling tracks in the sand going in the wrong direction. And this is what we refer to as a disorientation. And this is most likely caused by artificial lighting in the area. So hatchlings, as they, naturally emerge from a nest, they'll be attracted to the ocean by a lot of different cues. And one of them is that, behind them is darker than the horizon or the openness of the ocean. In a natural environment, the moonlight will reflect off the water, and that'll be the brightest horizon that they'll head towards. But in this circumstance, they didn't. And so one of the things that the county does is when we know this happens, we go out and we do a lighting inspection. And just real quick, I'll talk about our lighting ordinance that we have in place. It basically has 3 main points: that no source of light should be visible from the beach, like you see here, these globe lights. There shouldn't be reflective surfaces of the fixture, which is what you see here with these can lights. These are better, but they're still not great because this can look as bright as a bulb, just that reflection of the bottom of the can. And then no beach illumination, which is probably the worst case scenario, like what you see over here when you have light on the sand and you can see a shadow. That's beach illumination. And so those 3 things are mainly what we're looking for when we have a disorientation event. And then we try to work with those properties to get them to shield their lights, to safely light their properties, so that they can have a safe property and the sea turtles can safely get to the ocean. And so one of the mottos that's out there is keep it low, keep it shielded, keep it long. What we mean by low is low to the ground, because if you put the light just where you need it and it doesn't shoot up into the air unnecessarily, that's a better environment. It's actually even better for people because you're not seeing as much glare. Keep it shielded so that the light is only directed into the area where you need it. And then long is referring to the wavelength. So if you see especially some of the newer properties along the beach where they have more of an ambery candlelight type of glow to some of their lighting, that's because those lights are long wavelength and they're less visible to sea turtles. The bright white lights are the most problematic. Blues and whites are, more problematic for sea turtles. So we encourage people not to shine lights on the beach, including flashlights. There's some products out there where you can actually turn a regular old flashlight into a turtle-safe flashlight just by putting a sticker with red film over it, because it actually filters the wavelength of light into a longer wavelength that is safer for sea turtles and won't be as disruptive. So lights on the beach include, fires as well. There's been some reports of nests hatching in the vicinity of a fire and the hatchlings, being attracted into the fires. And the county actually has a checkout program where a lot of facilities will be able to loan you a flashlight to walk on the beach. And one of the things that visitors seem to love to do in Volusia County with their kids is to go chase ghost crabs at night. And ghost crabs are super fast and they live in the holes in the sand, and it's a thing. So we really try to encourage people to use the long wavelength flashlights when they're out there doing that. So now moving into sort of the after stages of a nest that's made it through all these potential problems. What we like to see is that it hatched. In some cases it doesn't, but what we do is we go in and with every nest that we can find the clutch of eggs, we'll do what we call reproductive success on it, and we'll count exactly what happened. And so in these pictures, you can see, some of the things that we find, including whole eggs that didn't hatch, or, a hatchling maybe that broke out of its shell but didn't quite make it out to the water. What we like to find are all of these hatched egg shells, that you see down here. We make little piles and count them all. And then every year we do basically an annual report where we can determine, based on the different species that are out there, what happened to each nest. Did it get evaluated? We couldn't find it, it was not located, washed out, depredated. And so we really have a good knowledge of what's happening on our beaches every year, which is pretty interesting. Right now, our reproductive success rate is about 78% on average, which is, I feel like a pretty good number. So 78% of the hatchlings are coming out of the nests. That's what that means. And then another really important thing that we like to educate people about as far as our nesting seasons go is our washback period. And this is usually between August and November in the fall, where we'll start to get, more of that storm activity picking up, and occasionally it'll push back in seaweed along our beaches. We do get seaweed along the beaches all year long, but during these months, it's more likely that there might be young sea turtles mixed in with the seaweed. And the reason for that is because all these sea turtle nests around the whole entire state have been hatching, and all of those sea turtles are going offshore to live in this floating sargassum seaweed. And if that gets pushed back in during these months, we often find these what we call post-hatchling sea turtles. And so we have some programs in place, including a volunteer program where we train people to help us go look for these sea turtles and rescue them. If they get left on the beach, they're subject to predation, to getting overheated. They could even get run over by cars, or, we've even had cases where, somebody ran over one with a bicycle. It's just, they're hard to see because they camouflage in so well, as you can see in some of these pictures, either with the seaweed itself, or they might get covered in windblown sand. And I will say, over the years, we've recovered, I think, nearly 10,000 of these washback sea turtles. So the next cool thing is that all those sea turtles that we collect and rescue, including the washbacks and other sick turtles and animals, they all go to our Marine Science Center, which is a facility located down in Ponce Inlet, where they have a sea turtle and shorebird hospitals. And they rescue basically all the wildlife that comes off Volusia County beaches and more from other beaches that don't have facilities, and they do a lot of good work down there. So it's also an educational facility similar to the Lionia, where they educate the public about coastal wildlife. So I always recommend people go for a visit down there. And I'm just going to hit on, I'm almost to the end here, but I'm going to hit on some of the other species of Volusia County that are along the coast that you might encounter. Again, I mentioned earlier the gopher tortoises. They are not sea turtles. They have claws, feet. They don't have flippers like sea turtles do. But a lot of people, when they see a gopher tortoise on the beach, they get confused if they're not familiar with the different species. So we sometimes call them dune dwellers. They live up in the sand dunes. But they will come out, and they will come out down to the water's edge to swim and cool off, and helps release some of the ticks or mites that get on them. They're actually a threatened species in Florida. And what I think is interesting is the females will actually lay their eggs right outside of the burrows. So you'll see what's referred to as a skirt of sand, and it's just another mound of thrown sand down here. It looks like also like an apron is another way to describe it, but the eggs will be right in this area. And so if you're visiting and you see a gopher tortoise burrow and you're curious and you want to look in the burrow, that's fine. Just do it from the side, and don't stand right here on that soft sand area. And here's a cute little hatchling of a gopher tortoise, which again is similar to some of the sea turtles, where the hatchlings in coloration look a lot different than the adults. And so for our friends that are listening and joining us from the Audubon, we'll hit on some birds real quick. The piping plovers are small migratory shorebirds that spend their winters here in Volusia County, primarily around the Ponce Inlet area. We've actually documented them almost every month of the year now, I think. But typically between August and May, they'll be here. Some of them are just passing through, while others are resident birds. And we're actually doing monthly surveys where we're able to identify where these birds are coming from based on their band combinations that some of them have. And they band them in their nesting areas. And so there's a handful of different breeding populations in North America, including like the Great Lakes area. And we'll know basically where these different birds are coming from based on their banding combinations. And we've had sightings from every single breeding population here in Volusia County. So that's pretty cool. If you get out to specifically New Smyrna Beach area or Ponce Inlet, Lighthouse Point Park, you might see a piping plover out there. And just another thing to mention is in this picture, this is a wintering phase, and their breeding phase, they look a little bit different. They'll have a black band on their head and around their necks. But when they're wintering here, they're really kind of just muted and gray and white. But what's very distinct about them also is their bright orange legs, and they forage in the sand, and they have, you know, a special little scratch that they do that makes them easy to identify. And a lot of our birds that come here are going to be federally protected. But in particular, the piping plovers, they're listed as either threatened or endangered just based on which breeding population that they come from, which is the only way you can tell is by those bands. And then the beach mice, which are only found on the south side of Ponce Inlet, are also a threatened species in Florida. There's different subpopulations around the state. The one that we have here in Volusia County is the southeastern beach mouse. Their population used to extend all the way from Palm Beach County up to Ponce Inlet, but because of so much development, a lot of their habitat has been sort of fragmented. So there's different, you know, populations. We have one here in Smyrna Dunes Park. I've heard that there's been some other sightings in some other parts south in New Smyrna, but the next population is not until we get down into Canaveral National Seashore. So they live in the dune system. They're mostly nocturnal. They come out of their little burrows at night, and they'll forage on the, you know, on the natural seeds and plants that they'll find in Smyrna Dunes Park. So not likely that you'll see one during the day, but I have seen tracks out there at the park. So if you get out there, you might get lucky. And of course, dolphins. Everybody loves to love dolphins, which can be found both in the ocean and in our coastal waterways. They feed on fish and squid. There's sightings, you know, year round, and we do have some research that's happening in Volusia County where they're able to identify, you know, some of these different animals based on the dorsal fin patterns, or some of them will have maybe some other scar patterns, which is really interesting. So we know we have resident dolphins, and then we have other dolphins coming in during different times of the year. But of course, they're very highly intelligent and social animals. We also have a lot of strandings in Florida of dolphins along both the same coastlines, whether it's on the beach or in the intercoastal waterways. And so that's one of the things that Volusia County is involved with by having a marine mammal stranding team, is that we respond to some of these dolphin calls. And sometimes, you know, dolphins are out there and they're just frolicking and having a good time, and people are concerned, and we get to go out there and, you know, watch them be just fine. And manatees, another, you know, popular species that brings people from around the world is to see our world famous manatees that are often found in our warm water, shallow waters around the coastal areas. You know, mainly this time of year during May through October. You can find them pretty much anywhere, including the ocean. But when the cold comes in, they'll move into more warm water sites. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people listening know what's going on with the manatees right now, where we're having an unusual mortality event because there's a loss of some of their foraging habitat in our Indian River Lagoon area. So, you know, our programs are in place, and we respond to, you know, any sick or injured manatees. And again, those sightings that people call in of concerned manatees. But still, you know, even outside of the UME, one of the biggest threats that manatees face are boat collisions. And it's because, you know, they're slow moving, they're spending a lot of time in the shallow waters. And as they're, you know, having their babies, they're out and intermingling with the boating community. So we have laws and protection in place, and we try to protect our manatees. And then, of course, they're herbivores. They eat the seagrasses, and that's why we're having trouble with them right now, is because some of that seagrass habitat is getting lost. Right whales, this is another seasonal species. You're only going to see them here usually between like December and March, and they're coming down from the northeast. They're also calving. They're bringing their babies or having their babies down here and keeping them warm through the winter months. They're spending a lot of time, just offshore within a couple miles usually, sometimes so close that we can see them even without binoculars. So anytime, there's whales offshore, it tends to create a lot of activity, and that we go out and we try to identify them or report those because the right whales are dwindling in numbers. I think the most recent numbers are under 400 in their total population. So there's a number to call if you do see any right whales during those months, and we just encourage people to kind of be aware and hopefully get to see one while you're here. Sharks. Of course, Volusia County has the reputation of being the world's, shark bite capital of the world. So we like to clarify that, sharks are everywhere. Of course, they're apex predators. They have a cute sense of smell. They eat fish and crustaceans, mollusks, all kinds of different things. Their skeletons are made of cartilage. They're normally solitary and not real social animals. And they're really instinctual. And so here in Volusia County, we've got a lot of swimming activity, and most of the shark bites that occur here are not fatal. They're mostly because the sharks are getting confused with people and surfers in the water with food. They're going after food, and a lot of times the water's churned up and it's not real clear, and it's not something that I feel like people should stay away from Volusia County over. Sharks are part of our ecosystem, and we should appreciate them as much as we do all the other wildlife. And so I'm at the end of our presentation. I did just want to, hit on some of the programs that are in place out there that you can get involved with if you want to, help make a difference. We have an Adopt a Beach program that entails adopting 1 mile of beach. We have 36 miles of beach throughout the county, and your group would get out there and clean up the beach, periodically, and report that back to us. And so that's always something that people like to get involved with different groups. We also have a once a year event on the 3rd Saturday in September. It's called the International Coastal Cleanup. We usually have about 40 sites along the beach and the river ways on the east side of the county. And so we encourage everybody to kind of pay attention to when that's coming up. I think this year it's September 17th, I want to say. So that's a big event that we want to invite everybody to come join us at, because we usually pick up, thousands and thousands of pounds of trash. If you go to our website at volusiaseaturtles.org, there's a lot of free educational material that you can look at and order or download from the website. And it's related to not only sea turtles, but all of our different wildlife species. So it might be of interest to those listening. And of course, we have a volunteer team, Volunteer Volusia. And there's a lot of different opportunities to get involved with a lot of different environmental programs. Sometimes they'll be doing just individual beach cleanups or storm drain marking, and lots of different things that you might be interested in. So there's a phone number there to call. Christy Miller is our current contact for that program, and I'm sure she would be glad to help you find something you can get involved with. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'm glad to answer any questions if you guys have any.